Kristen.
And I'm Bethany.
And this is Looking for the Middle,
the Christian Girl's Guide to Modern Dating.
We're here to help you date with confidence while honoring the Lord and to show you that your identity and contentment are in Christ. We're going to give you the tools that you need to date successfully and be set up well for success in a godly marriage.
If you've ever felt like you didn't really belong with any of the extremes in dating today, well, you're not alone. Neither did we. And that's why we're here looking for the middle.
Hello, friends. Welcome to welcome to the first episode of season 8, because it's the first one we're recording.
We recorded this one first.
But it's the second episode of the season. So welcome back to another episode of season 8. We are so excited, as we always are, to be with y'all and be chatting and back in the rhythm. Yeah, it's going to be a fun season for sure. So at the top, y'all know the drill if you've been around here for a while. If you are not following us on Instagram, you should go do that. You can find us at LFTM_podcast. It's always a fun time over there. And then if you are not subscribed to our newsletter, we send out a newsletter every Thursday, so the day after the week's episode premieres, with just some helpful links to resources that can help y'all as you're navigating dating and singleness. So books, blog posts, podcasts, YouTube videos, other episodes from our show that maybe we've referenced or that go kind of hand in hand with the topic for that week. And then, of course, the Hallmark movie of the month, our favorite portion of the newsletter. So you can sign up for that by going to the link in our Instagram bio or by going to our website, lookingforthemiddle.com. And there's a newsletter tab that you could check out there, but all sorts of fun ways to connect with us. And if you're new here, if you're like, oh, this random dating podcast I've never listened to, I'm going to check this out. This is your first time. Welcome.
Yes.
We are so happy to have you. We have lots of content if you want to go back. But this is a good time to just jump into.
Yeah.
So we're happy to have you. It's going to be a fun few months.
Yes, we're going to have a grand old time. So one thing I did want to mention, I'm hoping by the time this comes out, we have all of our ducks in a row.
Yes.
For this.
Fingers crossed.
It's still a few weeks off, so hopefully we do. But we are starting a Facebook group for you guys. This is something that was requested, just kind of as a community where you guys can interact with each other and kind of get to know each other and just build some friendships there. So we have a Facebook group. I'm hoping we have sent it out to everyone. If not, just kind of keep an eye out for it. Make sure you do go sign up for the newsletter, because that's how you'll get probably all of the details on that. And one thing I do know that we are still kind of figuring out and would love your feedback on too is you can DM us on Instagram or on Facebook. Just kind of like, what kinds of things would you like to see in that group? Because we want it to be something that's useful for you. I know I've joined Facebook type things before where it's kind of like the people in charge of it just ran with what they thought would be fun or what they thought would, but it just didn't really actually serve the needs of the group, and it was hard to really get involved. And so we don't want to do that. We want this to be really useful and beneficial for you guys. So do you want to see, would it be helpful if we asked questions, got conversations started, just kind of chit-chatted? Would it be helpful if we did lives once a month to talk with you guys? Just what kind of stuff do you want to see? Let us know. We want to make it something that you enjoy and that you really like.
Definitely.
So,
yeah.
I'll leave that at that. We will dive into that more as time goes on and we really get that off the ground. So I wanted to throw that out there. Last thing before we get into today's content, though, is the question of the day.
Whoop, whoop.
So it's my turn to ask the question, which is, what is your most strongly held but completely inconsequential belief?
Oh my gosh.
What is something you feel super strongly about but is of no real importance whatsoever?
Oh,
you know what I mean?
Great question. Oh my gosh. And now we start the clock of the 7 minutes of time. Bethany will have to cut out while I think of my answer. Something I feel really strongly about, but it doesn't really matter.
You won't mind?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So I will never be convinced that regular Oreos are not far superior to all other Oreos, with one exception that I've recently discovered. Just regular Oreos, double stuff, not as good. Mega stuff, definitely not as good. And the most stuff, or what, they're not. That cookie to cream ratio is only correct in regular Oreos.
She's quite the Oreo purist.
You will not convince me otherwise. I don't like other cream in the cookies. I don't like, that's it.
Just original.
Now, one thing I've recently discovered, Oreo Thins.
Oh, you love those.
I love them. The ratio is the same still. It's all
scaled.
Less.
Okay.
So those are acceptable. They're also better for you. So really they're not as good. Actually, they're not better for you. It just takes more of them to be the same.
To be the same amount. But which
you
in
feel
my
like you're
brain,
eating more of them.
my brain is, that means I can eat more,
Yeah.
not that I eat the same amount.
So,
gosh. I will say
mine.
whatever those Oreos you had at Galentine's Day,
those are Lindsay's.
the Java
chip.
oh
whatever.
my
She
gracious.
loves them too. I don't like coffee, so those
Yeah.
don't even.
I was wondering, I'm like, surely Bethany did not supply
No,
these
Lynn's
because
like obsessed with them.
this is not something that is lined up with Bethany's Oreo beliefs, but those are so good. So if you haven't tried those, I'm not even a big Oreo, like,
I know,
I
you're
like
not.
them,
Yeah.
but I don't reach for them all the
It's okay.
time.
We can still be friends.
Yes, opposites attract. As the episode says, oh my gosh, what am I know I have probably like 15 and I'm not thinking of any of them. Oh, okay.
Got it?
Okay, I've got one.
Okay.
I'm probably going to make a lot of people angry with this,
Okay.
but I really don't care.
It's inconsequential.
If you can tie in a sport, I don't think it's a real sport.
Oh, like if the competition can end in a tie?
Yes, which I realize at different levels, like football technically can. So maybe, I don't agree with it. If you are going to spend that much time, effort, and energy, and you can end the way you started, that's stupid.
Agree? Yes, I would agree with you on that.
I get very riled up about it. I dislike soccer for a lot of reasons. I know we probably have a lot of people who love soccer because it's like the world sport or whatever, and I'm just not about it. One, it has way too much running and not enough scoring, and I'm more of a
yes. I have decided I don't like high turnover, low
reward
sports.
Yes,
Yeah.
agreed. So, but I think it's absolutely ridiculous that you can play a sport and tie.
That's a good one.
Thank you. This is also coming from me, who comes from the family that, like, when you don't keep score in a sport, we kept score at my brother's kindergarten upward basketball games on the sideline because they wouldn't keep it. So we're a little probably unhealthy on the competitive spectrum, but I just don't think I don't think you should tie.
I like this. I'm going to put a question box on our Instagram because now I'm intrigued.
Ooh.
I want to know what you guys' very strongly held but completely inconsequential beliefs are.
Yes.
So I'm going to put a question box on Instagram. Y'all go put your answers. We'll share them. We can talk about it. Because, we can do some polls with the answers and get people all riled up.
Yes, I love it.
Okay. Anyway, let's move on to today's topic.
Yes, which we are answering the question, do opposites really attract? And I feel like we had something similar to this on we just keep a running list of topic ideas. And then I think I was talking to Melanie or somebody, and the thought kind of came of like, oh, is this really a good idea? Because everybody's like, oh, opposites attract. I'm like, do they?
Yeah.
And is it always a good idea? And what if you are similar to the person that you're with? And so when Bethany and I were kind of mapping out the season, we're like, oh, this will be a good one to kick things off with. So I'm excited about it.
So, okay, this isn't really in the notes, but before we jump into what we do have in the notes, do opposites attract in your mind? Like, just straight up, just answer the question. What do you think?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do
you think it's a good thing? Most of the time.
Most of the time.
Okay. You do?
Okay. I do. I think, I don't really have any like scientific reasoning to back that up, but I think, let me put it this way. I think if you're both like the majority-ish healthy, then
okay,
yes.
That's what I was going to say. I do think they do. I think for girls, though, a lot of the times that opposite is something, a lot of times we're like, we'll fix it. So you're not really attracted to the opposite thing in him.
Like you're attracted to the project.
To the challenge of fixing it.
It's like guys like the chase of like getting the girl, and then girls like the challenge of like molding the guy.
Yes, I think that is our natural bend.
I feel like there's an episode somewhere in that too.
Probably, yes. Put that on the list. Yeah. But I think the tendency or the value in it once you have been redeemed by Jesus is different. There is still value in being opposite, but I think it's different once you put that filter over it.
Well, and I think too, it kind of depends on how you view, like, what are you thinking about when you say opposites attract?
Well, that's
is
true
it like
too.
Opposite personalities? Is it opposite, like experiences? Is it opposite lifestyles? Opposite interests? it's opposite of everything.
Yeah.
Because my mind goes to personality.
Yeah. I don't think complete opposites attract.
Yeah.
I think there has to be, we just talked about common interests in Couchcast last week. I think there has to be some commonality.
Yeah, I agree.
And it may be that your faith, like that may be the thing, but there's got to be something.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk then about like our personal experience. You go first. I know I've dated guys very similar to me. I've dated guys very opposite of me. So
yeah.
Let's just talk about that.
Okay, so I've always been a big believer in the opposites attract, whatever the saying thing, belief, because that's the way my parents are. Okay. And so that was my experience growing up. That was the marriage I saw the most of, and they have a great marriage, and they could not be more different. when it comes to personality and wiring and all of that. Now, they had a lot in common as far as their backgrounds and their interests and things like that. So they weren't just complete opposites, but I mean, as far as personalities go, they could not be more different. Yeah. And so I always kind of had the thought of, oh, well, this is what
marriage looks like.
Yeah, this is what marriage looks like. This is what makes sense. You're like, oh, you'll balance each other out, which we'll talk about in a second. So that was the filter I had going into dating. But then as I dated guys kind of like you said. Some were opposite of me. I would say more so they were probably similar, which I didn't really figure out until probably 2 years ago. Or they were opposite in ways that I didn't expect. Not like the generic, like, oh, well, I'm introverted, so he'll be extroverted, or I'm this and he'll be that. We were opposite in ways that I didn't ever really think about. So I've had experience with both. I will say I do prefer being with someone who is more on the opposite side of the spectrum than similar, because there is balance that comes with that, and there's different perspectives, and there's, a lot of times he has strengths where I'm weak and I have strengths where he's weak and stuff like that. So I do like that. However, as someone, there's
big caveat.
Big caveat. As someone who does not like conflict, which I guess most people don't like conflict, but I really don't like conflict. I have learned that when you're with someone who is super different from you, there is going to be more conflict, especially starting out, because you're so different. You handle situations differently. You communicate differently. You have different expectations and experiences and filters and everything. And so, like, I've learned in a lot of times when I'm dealing with conflict, I talk to my dad a lot, because me and my dad are very similar. So we handle things similarly. Yeah. And so I'm like, okay, you're wise and older than me, so help me. And then I'm learning from my mom, who is obviously very different from me, as she's different from my dad, like a different perspective on things. But I've learned, I'm like, well, I wouldn't have handled that way at all. But I'm not anything like you. So I have learned that's a big, you can't have your cake and eat it too situation. So I like more than I dislike about dating somebody opposite.
Okay.
But there definitely are challenges that come with dating somebody that's different from you in a lot of ways. So I agree. That would be mine.
Yeah, I have always said I didn't want to date the boy version of me. And I still don't. I mean, I think if you're similar in all ways, that'll get boring. I mean, for me, that would. But I've also learned through trial and error, sorry guys, that does not mean I want to date someone who is opposite of me in every way. So I don't think, when you think about opposites attract, I think it can be on a more micro level as opposed to on a macro level of like, we are complete opposites in every way. Do opposites attract in several specific ways for you. And I have dated guys who were very similar to me. And I like I said, I've dated guys who were very, very opposite of me in a lot of ways. And in most of those situations, they all made sense on paper, both the opposites and the ones who are similar. And so I think it just comes down to on a specific level. What do you have in common and what do you not with that specific person? And, you know, one area where maybe you guys are opposite, it might work well with one guy, whereas someone who you're opposite in that same category might not work well because of other things.
Yeah,
like, you know,
that's so true.
It may be that if you're both stubborn, let's say, but you also both, so you have that in common, but then one of you is more conflict averse than the other, let's say, but you're both very stubborn. We're not going to want to give, but you're also, one of you's going to run away from conflict, the other one's not, and that may not work. Whereas if you have more give and take, or you are more similar in your conflict approach, the other of those things might work.
Yeah. That's a great way to think about it. I hadn't thought about it that way.
Even some of those things where you're like, okay, I do well with an opposite in this, may be contingent on other things being similar or opposite too. Anyway, I don't know.
I think that's good.
I do think a lot of times the whole opposites thing is seen, whether it's in movies or whatever, as it's more romantic. You've got the fire and ice, the passionate, exciting thing. But I always think, are you really looking for this like bipolar relationship? Like you like
That's so true.
That's the glamorized movie version of it, but in real life, you've got this constant up and down, which is not.
Well, because in the movies, you're only seeing the up. You're seeing one down where they, you know, have the fight at the end of the movie and then they resolve it.
Oh, wait, no. That's the thing is, there's this huge blow up, this huge issue. And then they come back and they're like, no, we love each other. But nothing, like, that wasn't addressed or fixed most of the time. And it's like, okay, you're just going to repeat this over and over again. Was that, I can't remember where I heard it said that's why fairy tales don't have sequels.
Yeah.
So anyway,
no one wants to watch that.
No one
too
wants
close
to see
real
that.
life. That's not an escape from reality at all.
Yeah, and so I don't think that's what, at least that's not what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
I think it's more about how does this other person complement and balance out your strengths and weaknesses. Because at the end of the day too, your relationship isn't about your relationship as the end all be all. It's about how does it make you both more like Christ? And then what kind of a picture of the gospel is it to the world?
Yeah.
And so like, if you're solely looking at it from this movie perspective of the relationship as like the ultimate, so you want it to be exciting and you want to do all these things because that's your ultimate end. That's just a totally different lens that you're looking through, as opposed to, is this person going to sanctify me? You know, push me in my, they're not going to sanctify you, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Push you in your sanctification. Are you going to be able to serve well together and all of those things? So yeah, I think that has been what I have learned over time, is that sometimes things that you thought would be really great for you, I mean, because I've had things that I was just like, on my list, these are things I'm looking for, big things. And then you get that thing, and in real life, you're like, oh, that's not as helpful as I thought it was going to be. The big thing is, like, you have to learn to adjust and grow and change those things, because if you stay in this fairy tale place in your head of like, no, but I really want this because I think this is what it's going to be like. If after a time or two of having that thing, whatever that quality or characteristic is, and it never works out well, I don't mean the relationship, I mean that specific thing, you got to let go of what you have in your head.
Yeah.
It's not reality at that point.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and I think the other side of the coin too is there may be things where you think, oh, we have to be similar in this, or if we're opposite, this is never going to work. Yeah. And then you realize, oh, that's really not that big of a deal. Yeah. And I'm not going to jump ahead yet because we'll talk about this at the end, but you don't figure that out until you date somebody.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's the thing I keep going back to is a lot of the conversations Bethany and I have had about this is what our expectation was of how something looked on paper versus how it was in reality. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, not in every situation, but a lot of times things end up panning out differently in real life than you think they will based on how it looks on paper.
Yes. And the key is, if you hold on to what you think what it looks like on paper, if you hold on to that as being your guide, and that's the thing that never gets changed or edited. You don't ever edit that list on paper. I think that may get you in trouble.
Yeah, I would agree.
Because you're going to keep looking for the same thing that doesn't work because you think, you think that's not the problem.
Yeah.
And so it's definitely an evolving and growing process.
Definitely.
Okay, so as we so like to do around here, let's now look at some pros and cons.
Yes.
A good
Love me a good pro-con list.
So, first thing on the pros list of being pros of being opposite with someone, whether it's completely, whether it's in a few areas, whatever it is. You can and do balance each other out. You see each other's blind spots probably better, and you're able to speak into those areas, I guess. So I think that is something that is very much a pro. Another one I think that kind of dovetails from that is that there is great growth that can happen in your sanctification when you have those differences, especially if they're things, I mentioned being stubborn earlier, where if the two of you are both really stubborn, well, you're not going to see that, like, not that you never would, but because you're the same in that, it's not as much room, I don't think, to change and grow and be more sanctified in that, because you're both, like, it's probably a blind spot for them too, and that, like, you just don't see it as much. Or it'll blow up because they're that way, but they see it in you, and you just go round and round. But
that's been more my experience. It's way easier to point it out in the other person, even if it's a quality you have. And then they're like, well, you're being the same way. I'm like, no, I'm not.
No, but I do think when you have that opposite perspective, there's great room for them to see those things and push you and bring you along. And same for you. There's just a lot of room for that to be something that can work out well, I think.
Yeah. And I think what's cool too is when you are really different from somebody and you see qualities in them that you admire, that you like, that you wish you had, you get to see someone live those out and then learn to emulate those things in your own life. You know, it's really, like you said, there's a lot of room for growth, and it's really cool to be able to look at this person that you're dating and that you're in a relationship with and be like, wow, I really love how just easily they forgive people. That's not something I'm good at. And so to watch them do that, because it's one thing to be like, oh, I know I need to forgive better or quicker or whatever. But then to see somebody model that for you, somebody you really love and care about, is a really cool thing. And then you have an example to follow of, hey, I really like this about them. I wish I was more this way. I want to learn from you. And that's a really cool thing to see that happen on both ends, because you would hope that he would have the humility and the self-awareness to want to do that with you too, and recognize things in you that he doesn't have quite the, like, natural default to do, and wants to emulate those things that he admires in you. So that's the really, like, beautiful part of it. There are also parts of, like, oh, well, you just I've reacted both ways of, like, oh, I really like this about him and I wish I was more like that. And then other times when it's like something you like but it's pointed at you and you know you're not that way, you're like, well, aren't you just Mr. Perfect? And that's in your flesh that reaction comes out. So just be mindful of that too. One other pro before we jump to the cons is that a lot of times when you're different from somebody, you're going to end up trying and experiencing and doing things you would have never done on your own or with someone who's really similar than you. Whether that's just doing, things out of your comfort zone, going places you never would have gone, trying food you never would have tried. I mean, this doesn't have to be super deep. It can just be things that, like, oh, well, I've never done it that way, or I've never eaten this before, or I've never thought about going there, or jumping out of a plane, if you want to go to the extreme. But this is something that I really love because I'm not a super adventurous person or a very spontaneous person. So when I am with somebody like that, it's so much better and so much more fun, because even though I may be hesitant at first, or like, I don't know about this or whatever, a lot of times, I'd say probably 70 to 80% of the time, I'm really glad I did the thing or, you know, whatever, because I wouldn't have done it on my own. There are the other, you know, 20% that I'm like, I knew I wouldn't like this.
I knew I would hate this.
And my opinion was correct. Or my assumption was correct.
Yeah.
But
yeah, you definitely get pushed out of your comfort zone.
And that's really, it's a good thing. And, you know, we're so, I think as humans, just apt to dig our heels in and stay complacent and stay where we're comfortable. And, you know, growth doesn't happen in the midst of comfort. So I think that that's something really cool about being with somebody that's different from you.
I agree. I think that's one of, in my experience, that has been one of the funnest pros.
Yeah.
I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Is doing those things. You're like, oh, wow, I never would have done this on my own. I never would have tried this. I never would have. Some of it's just, I never even would have thought about going and doing this
Absolutely.
thing. And it's not, I'm not talking about like big spiritual things. I'm talking about going to an experience, like go try something new, go try a restaurant. Like you were saying, go do things that you wouldn't. It can be little things.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think that's good. Okay, so now let's move on to the not so good things.
Womp, womp. On to the cons.
This is a con that I have seen, that I have dealt with, I guess you could say, is that sometimes when you are really different from someone, understanding where that person is coming from can be difficult. And I think this is something that I struggle with maybe more than the average person. I don't know. I feel like I do. Based on just
vulnerability hour with Bethany. Here we go.
I'm a very decisive person. I'm a very rational person. And so I look at something and I evaluate it and I have a decision and I have the reasons why. And I do that fairly quickly. And then when you couple that with my horrible tendency to think that I'm never wrong, I'm pretty set in what I think a lot of times. Kristen will attest.
Yes.
I always say it doesn't really matter what it is. If you give me something, I'll have an opinion about it. Like I can come up with it.
It's true.
And so it's hard for me, and it's something that I work on, is understanding differences like that, because in my mind, why would anyone be different? It makes sense to me what I think and how I've evaluated this and all these things. So others don't make sense.
Yeah.
And so that rational part of my brain kicks in of like, why would you want to do something that doesn't make sense? It doesn't make sense.
Right.
So this is one that's a constant, and you're never going to be with someone who's completely like you. So this will always be something I know that I have to deal with and have to work on. And so that's something that I do focus on. But the more different you are, the bigger this con becomes, I think. Because like you were saying, these opposites, quote unquote, aren't solely personality. It could be how they grew up and versus how you grew up. It could be how you socialize. Do you like going out and he likes staying in and having people over? What kind of entertainment do you like? Do you like doing the same types of things? Now, going back to what Kristen said, you'll try different things. You'll do different. That's good. But sometimes you're like, but I don't get why would you want to do this? Why is this entertaining? And that's where grace and being selfless come in, because it's important to this other person. So it doesn't have to be as important to you, but you should want to be involved. How you vacation is another one. Types of things, like how do you spend holidays? What does family look like? Because how you grew up is going to influence what that looks like to you. Whether it's, I had an awesome family and I want it to be exactly the same, or I had an awesome family and I want it to be completely different, but I also don't have a good point of reference. So you're trying to meld these things together. There's going to be some discussion that needs to be had, and that might not always be fun.
Yeah, definitely not.
Now, I have this under the cons, because I was thinking in that line of thought when I came to it, is that there will be lots of compromising that happen here. Which isn't bad, I don't guess necessarily. I mean, that's not a con per se, but when you have to compromise a lot, that means you're not getting your way a lot. And anytime that happens with anyone, and don't try to act like you're better than we are. This is across don't be like, oh no, I'm not like that. You are. We all are. I'm just saying,
it's part of being
this
human.
Is a universal thing.
Yeah.
The more you don't get your way, the more it opens you up for potential conflict. It just does. And so I think that is something that, again, if you're different in a few areas, it's going to be easy. If you're different in almost every area, this is going to increase exponentially. So just be aware of that. I don't think really any of these things that are cons are necessarily like, sometimes a pro and a con is like, okay, if there's too many on this con list, like, we probably shouldn't be together. I don't think that's the case here necessarily. It's just more of a kind of thing where it's like, okay, we need to be aware of these things and know it ahead of time and just kind of have it on our radar so that we're not surprised by them when they pop up. But it's something to deal with and move forward. We're not talking about like huge character flaws. They're just different. No one's going to be perfect. Yeah. So anyway.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of times cons are like your reason not to do something, and you're not going to date anybody where you don't run into at least one of these. Yeah. Even if you're like really similar to the person, because there is not another you out there. No. So you're going to find, even if you're mostly similar to somebody that you're dating, there will be differences. So this isn't where normally we're like, warning, don't do this. Right. It's more of a, like Bethany said, these are things you need to remember and keep in mind that you will come up against. And the degree in which you come up against it will vary based on how similar or how different you are from the person that you're dating. And the last thing, it kind of goes hand in hand with what she was saying before in regards to conflict. But y'all know my cons are going to be around conflict. But when you are specifically different in the way you communicate, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's going to be pretty rocky when you're figuring that out. And again, the opportunity for conflict will probably increase because not only are you disagreeing on something or are you having a different perspective on something, but then you're talking about it differently, or you're trying to communicate it differently, or maybe he is a verbal processor and you are an internal processor, or maybe, he has a temper and you shut down when he has an outburst, or maybe you have the temper. I don't know. So as you're trying to figure out not only what the issues are that you're dealing with, you kind of tack onto that how you communicate about the issues. If that's super different, that's going to add another level of complexity. Again, not impossible to overcome at all. But as you are, I feel like this is the point of your relationship where you're going to figure this out is after the woo phase. But you don't need to wait and figure this out like after you're married. Like, I was listening to a podcast this morning about, it was a Christian counselor was talking about relationships, and he said that the first 90 days of a relationship is like the woo period. Okay. And he's like, I don't recommend anybody get engaged in the first 90 days because the woo hasn't worn off yet. He's like, not that I'm sure there aren't people who've beaten that, but as a generalization, I don't recommend that. And so when you kind of get through that and you're having these more serious conversations and the relationship is getting deeper and you're having a fight here or there about certain things, that's where this stuff's going to come up, and it's worth sorting through and not just shoving under the rug, because it's this kind of stuff that you're going to realize, okay, yes, this is going to be tough, but we can work through it, or this is not going to work and we don't need to continue in this relationship. Good point. Just keep that in mind.
Got it.
Wait until after that sounds like a blog post title or something, like if we do an episode on that, and then there's
after the woo.
Wait till after the woo wears off. Sounds like a country song. Oh man,
that's hilarious.
Okay, so now that we've talked about our experiences, we've talked about pros and cons, let's kind of wrap this up with basically what do we do now? Like if we've determined that there are pros and cons to dating somebody different than you, there are perks, there are potentials. Is that a plural?
There is the potential.
There is the potential for conflict. That sounds better. What do you do? What do you look for? Let's kind of dive into that. And I will answer that question first by saying the first thing you need to remember is you are only going to figure all of this out by dating. This is not something that you can purely do in your head or in hypotheticals or vicariously through your friends' relationships. Can you learn a lot that way? Absolutely. But you are not going to know specifically what works well with you if you don't date.
Yeah.
And again, goes back to what Beth and I were saying earlier. Everything can make sense on paper.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, it's like when you build IKEA furniture.
Yeah.
Like if you look at the directions, like technically this would make sense on paper. And then you actually go try to build the dang thing and you end up like me and throwing a hammer into your couch and like just because I didn't want to break anything, but I wanted to throw something and, you know, screaming and trying to do something without any help. And it's just awful. And so something can make sense on paper, but until you actually go to build the relationship, it may not, you know, you're not going to know exactly what's going to work. And so, the only way you're going to know is by dating. So don't feel like you've got to have this all figured out ahead of time. Don't feel bad if you decide you need to change some things that you were looking for. We talk all the time about how our lists have been modified quite drastically since we first made them. And that's because we've dated.
Yeah. And that's one thing I was going to point out is, you were saying you have to figure these things out by dating. And I wanted to just kind of encourage, I guess, too, that if you go into something and you have your list all figured out and you're like, this is what I need, this is what I'm looking for and whatever. And then you date someone who has several of those things and it's not what you were hoping. Don't view it as a failure. You know, it's just an encouragement to just say, okay, well, that wasn't exactly what I was thinking. And learn from that, grow from that, and take the positive from that. It doesn't mean you're bad at dating. It doesn't mean you need to change necessarily things about yourself. Like, don't change who you are unless it's like a character flaw that needs improvement. But don't change who you are so that this guy you've created on paper will maybe be more compatible with you, as opposed to changing the paper.
Yeah.
And saying, oh, you know what? Maybe I need something a little bit different, and finding that real guy to be with the real you.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Y'all know I love a good sports analogy, and I coach basketball, so I will do my best to explain this in ways that if you don't watch basketball, you understand what I'm saying. But I was just telling Bethany about the varsity girls team we coached. We played a game a couple weeks ago, and the first half we only scored 9 points, and it was absolutely atrocious. And we looked like we had never played a basketball game in our entire lives, and it was so frustrating. But I am sitting there, I'm like, these girls are not bad at basketball. They are not bad. They have the skill set. But they were not applying it in ways that was helpful. And so we go out there. It's not like I went and got a brand new team. I didn't go pick up people out of the audience. Like, all right, y'all go try, because clearly our people aren't working. It's like, no.
You didn't give up at halftime.
No.
Like, there's no point in even trying this anymore.
No, they kept going. And did we have to make adjustments? Yes. To the game plan, yes. To the way they were playing, yes. Because even though they had the skill set, they had to apply it differently in order to be successful. Right. And we ended up winning the game. And there was quite a swing in the third quarter. It was really great. And I was a lot less stressed in the third quarter. But you don't just totally throw in the towel. And like Bethany said, you're not bad at dating because you have one bad experience or one bad relationship or whatever. It's just... That's
just dating.
It is. And... dating is not a game of ratios here. You are going to have a very low success rate.
Yeah.
It only needs to work once. Like, it really just needs to work once. And this is not like, oh, I need to have 14 successful relationships before I can get married. It's like, nope, they're all going to fail except for one, hopefully. And that's all you have to worry about. So it's not like you need to have a winning record here. It's just learning to make those adjustments as you go is what's important. Not just thinking, oh, well, I had it all wrong and it didn't work, so I must be awful and I don't know anything and this is terrible and I'm either going to give up or entirely change who I am. Like, don't go to extremes.
Those are extremes.
Yes. So, good point.
Okay. I've lost my page. Hold on. Okay. Next thing, and this is, I've kind of touched on it a couple times, but this is a big one for me, is I'm looking for someone who is different in some ways and similar in others. In order for that to work, though, you have to know yourself and know what those areas are. You can't just say, okay, well, I'm going to look for someone who's different in some ways and similar in others and be like, oh, we'll find out what ways those are later. Like,
look at the draw.
It's not that. It's not a general, well, he can be different in some ways and similar in others. Everyone's going to be that. Like, you need to know kind of what those things are. And one thing, just to give you like a practical example, because this is one that I've had to like learn over time, is like, for me, you would think, and I did, that I'm super talkative and outgoing and, you know, like to socialize and all these things, that it would work well for me to be with someone who is more classically introverted, maybe a little shy, just really quiet. That's like, I mean, you know what I mean? Those two are some of the first things to think about of like opposites attract. And that works so well for some people. I've dated that guy a couple of times, and that's just, it doesn't work for me. I really like the witty, like banter, like that sort of interaction. And when someone's not, I'm not gonna say I get bored, but I don't know. It's
not as fun.
It's not fun.
Yeah. And that's okay.
And yeah, so in my experience, that's not been the case. So I know that about myself, and I know on paper that would make sense. In real life, it just doesn't for me. Now, I'm not saying we need to go out all the time and socialize all the time and whatever, but I also know, like, I need to be with someone whose view of socializing and hospitality are similar to mine. That they like to talk and interact and cut up and whatever. We need to be similar in those things. Because that's what I've said. I on my list is that I want to be with someone who likes to laugh. We don't have to have the same sense of humor necessarily. So we could be different in that, but we need to have the similarity of we both like to laugh. If he's super serious and stoic and doesn't like that, that doesn't work well with me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So yeah.
I think that's good. And kind of piggybacking off of that, I think, like Bethany was saying, figuring out what those things are that you would rather be different or that you would want to be similar. Figure those things out ahead of time, if at all possible, not while you're dating somebody or on the brink of dating somebody. And I say that because if you're already with someone and you want, I'm not saying don't, but you might want to rope in some people to help you kind of sort through that and make sure that you're not just writing down a list of qualities that describe the person that you're with. Because if you have a certain guy in mind, that is, whether you realize it or not, going to affect what you say you're looking for or what you say you're okay with being different versus what you're okay with being similar on. Whereas if you're not with anybody or you don't have a certain person in mind, you can truly and authentically say, hey, I really want to make sure that he can banter and, laugh with me. Or it is not okay if he is an introvert because I'm super extroverted and I don't want to feel like I've got to be home half the week. Like, whereas if you're dating somebody and they are an introvert, you're like, oh, well, I guess it's fine, when really you get bitter and resentful about it all the time. So
don't throw all those things you've learned from your past experience. Because like you're saying, you have to date people to really get a handle on this. So don't throw those things you've learned out the window because the guy in front of you is all of those things that you've learned don't work. Now, I'm not saying you can't compromise, but you guys know the situations we're talking about where there's someone in front of you, he seems interested, but he's got 5 things that you know absolutely do not work for you in a relationship. But here's someone who's interested. He's someone. And you like other things about him, but you know this never works. And I'm not talking about like, oh, he likes different movies than me. I'm talking about more fundamental life things. Just really think about that. Either this isn't going to work, we don't need to get started with this, or I really need to put in some change to some things in my life before this is going to work. And you know the difference. You know what those things are. We can't, so many things. We can't give you a cookie cutter 1, 2, 3 list of do this, don't do that, whatever. We can give you some broad principles and kind of guide thought processes, but we're not in every situation. We don't know. So
exactly.
Take that, do
go
with
in
it.
Godspeed.
Yes. That's
man.
Funny.
All right, Bethany, final thoughts.
Okay. So my final thing that I think I would leave you with, and I've just been thinking about this over time, not just today, is this is not like the movies. We talk about that with so many things, but I think movies have just killed relationships in a lot of ways for us, in that in all of the rom-com plot lines, the negative character qualities in someone are either just glossed over completely, or they're made to be cute and endearing. For example, I watched a Hallmark movie a while ago that I don't even remember the exact plot, but I remember telling Kristen about this. So the girl is engaged or about to be at the beginning of the movie. She's going back to her hometown. I think they grew up together. He's like a dentist now, I think. He's a dentist. He has a good job. He has a house. He has
he's stable.
His life together. So they're going back to the town, and going into it, though, that's not going to last, right? I mean, how these things go.
Yeah.
Let's be real.
Yeah.
So they're going back to the hometown, and I want to say the guy she ends up with that comes back to town, I think it was for their mom's surprise birthday party, is her fiance's brother.
Oh.
Who?
Oh dear.
Wanders the country more or less. He's an artist, or he plays guitar or whatever, aka very selfish, immature, has no idea what he's doing with his life, and is not reliable. Okay? So how do they paint this in the movie? Dentist guy, who she's practically engaged to, is boring. And he doesn't understand. And he's just, what kind of a fun life would that be? Versus brother, who in real life would be a bum, is the exciting, intriguing one that's who she ends up with. And it hit me after watching that movie that we want the glossed over, and we want the fun parts of what the brother is painted to be, but we also want him to be the dentist who has his whole life together. That's what we want in real life. That's not what they paint in the movies. And so I think you have to be smart about what those opposite things are, because you can't have it both ways. Does that make sense? That's kind of going back to that movie. But it's not going to be this seamless, fall into place, just automatically complimentary thing. This takes work and effort in real life to be able to build a relationship around things that are different. We're fallen, sinful human beings. So, in that movie, she ends up with this guy who his life is 100% different than hers, but it seems exciting in the moment. And so they end up together, and it's that would never work. And so, but the whole thing is the work and the effort that went into building a life with the dentist is boring and not worth the effort. And so I think so often these days, it seems like anytime something's not easy, or it doesn't just automatically fall into place, then that just suddenly means, it's time to end it.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to be really blunt and honest with you guys, because that's what I'm good for around here. That is a really great way to end up single forever.
Whew.
It is. And
She's
I'm preaching to the choir, but that right there will have you single for the rest of your life. If the moment you get to something being hard, or it's difficult, or it's not just falling into place like the movies, you cut and run, you're never going to have a long-term, meaningful relationship, because they're all going to be hard.
Yeah.
Whether you're opposite in 100 ways or 2.
Yeah.
It's never going to be easy. So this whole opposites attract thing is about kind of back at the beginning of finding a relationship that honors the Lord, that you serve him well together, and being opposite and similar in ways that enable you to both be able to do that to the best of your ability, not to make it easy on you to have a good relationship. That's the goal at the end of the day.
Amen. And we're calling it there.
Okay.
You just can't end it better than that. So good. All right, guys, that wraps up episode 2 for this season. Again, thanks for joining us. We're super excited for all of the different conversations that we get to have this season. And if you haven't already, like we mentioned at the beginning of the episode, we did a couch cast this past Friday where we talked about the importance of common interests and how that our opinions on that question have changed since we first talked about it 3 years ago, which holy crap, it's been 3 years.
Yeah.
And then our season premiere, if you haven't listened to that, is where I sit down with...
Me too. I'm there too.
I was going to say, I sit down with Kevin, my fiance, and Bethany, interviews, mainly him.
Yeah.
But that's our Men Tell All episode. But you guys had been wanting some details about him, and I said that I would not break the rule that he doesn't get talked about until we're engaged. So he's thrilled to finally actually have a name. But if you haven't checked that episode out already, be sure and go do that. It was a really fun conversation, and we will be back next week with another episode for y'all. But until then, I'm Kristen,
And I'm Bethany,
and this is Looking for the Middle.